Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Starting a Counseling Practice podcast. And today I am joined by Sonila Sidaris, a psychologist in Chicago who runs a group practice and a nonprofit. I'm really excited to share her story with you so that you can hear about other ways to serve your community and what that looks like from the real truth experience that Sonila goes through managing it all. So Sonila, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Let's talk about when you went into private practice. How long ago was that, and how did it first start?
Oh, goodness. So my background is I'm a social worker. I was working in nonprofit for a few years. Then I moved to Chicago for my doctorate in clinical psychology. And so I think it was like the last year where in clinical psychology, we call it internship, but it's really more of a kind of like a residency. And everybody was kind of like, what am I going to get my internship? Because it's the last thing to finish. And I was kind of like, I had a baby during a program, very heavy program to finish and to complete. And so I didn't feel like I wanted to just rush into like the internship right away. It felt like I want to do something different. At this time, 2014, I've been working for nonprofit for since 2006. So what is it? 8 years. And so, no, oh my gosh, it's not 8 years. It's 2006. Help me here. It is about 8 years, 8 years in private practice. And I was like, I just want to do something different. I know that I want to help the community. I know that I want to go work with nonprofit, but it felt like I couldn't really like stand up financially and definitely emotionally, psychologically, because it pulls for you, right? You put so many hours in and then you don't really have time for yourself or family. And this time, as I mentioned, he was, I think, 2 years old. So I decided to just see what programs would be there to teach me how to have a private practice because I had no clue, like most of therapists. And so I was Googling private practice. And this was during the time where I finished my internship. During my internship, finished my internship. And then I was supposed to actually get my postdoc hours. Because without those hours, you just don't get licensed. As simple as that. And so I searched for it. And I remember I talked to Miranda. It was September. And I talked to Miranda with a phone consultation. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and do this. And then I also had this great opportunity to work for a nonprofit, which I did work for 5 years. An LGBTQ community. I didn't know much about LGBTQ. It was a handful of people I'd worked with, transgender, so I was eager to learn new things. So I was like, I can open my private practice and then I can also do this. So that's how it really started. It was random, but leap of faith on my end. Because I remember my husband saying, do not spend $2,000. We don't have any money right now. We need to, and I was like, click. I followed my gut feeling because it felt like it was the right thing to do for me at the time.
Mm-hmm. So you started out as a solo practice. And how were those initial years doing solo? And when did you decide to go into group?
So we've been in group practice for 3 years now. But I was a mom. My priority was my little one. And then I was working for a nonprofit. And also I was juggling this private practice. What I did is I did boot camp. And within a few months, I worked on my website. I worked on connection. And initially it fell flat. I had a doctor that referred about 20 clients. Was so afraid to do that phone consultation, especially when it came to money, that even when I had clients, that prospective clients that wanted to say, well, let's schedule something. I was like, well, why don't you check with insurance first? And then very timid. And so the way it worked was like the first few years were challenging.
What was hard about those initial years of starting your private practice?
Well, what was challenging that it still felt kind of like a new language to learn. And it wasn't all the years. The first 6 months I fell flat on, even though everything that you teach us, I needed to build my own confidence. The Within 6 months I get my first client and things were going well. It was just like, it was so hard to work for those couple of years in a nonprofit and make sure that my private practice was going. So it was juggling all these things, being a mom, working a full-time in a nonprofit, and then having my private practice, which I would work on Saturday and Sunday.
Why didn't you leave the nonprofit?
I mean, it was a couple of different reasons. I was really looking, the way I've worked as a therapist is I've always put myself into different scenarios so I can grow in different areas. And what that was like is, either substance abuse facilities or inpatient psych or outpatient or school settings, prisons. And this was a population that I hadn't worked much with and had a lot of trauma, and I was under the substance abuse. But the LGBTQ was really appealing to me because it was a population that I hadn't immersed into it. And so I loved what I did. It just that I was feeling like, well, I like to learn these things, but I can see how much income I can make for like few hours. And it's a safety net. I think we're kind of trained to have, a job that pays every 2 weeks, and you have your schedule and you just put your head down and you do that. And some pushback from other therapists in the area that I worked with, actually, as a way kind of like, because my practice has never been insurance based. It's always been out of network. And so it's insecurities, I think, that kept me there.
Do you think, can you talk about your experience too? You're not from the US, correct? And how do you think that also plays into starting a practice when you're in a country that isn't your home country?
I think that plays a huge role, and it depends on the person. But my story is I moved here as an immigrant. I literally had $300 in my pocket. And I moved here at 20 years old and wanted to make it.
Yeah.
And so as an immigrant and a woman, I think that these intersectionalities play a role on how you view yourself. So I always felt like a secondhand citizen here because I moved as an adult, as a young adult. I didn't speak the language. I didn't have the documentation. I didn't have all the resources. All I wanted to do is work, bring my family here, go to school, which was also very important. And so how that plays a role is that, when you fear less, and then you go into a field to help, working in Detroit at the time, you almost like judge people making money, and not consciously, but for me, it was like, I cannot work with higher end individuals. I only have to work in the thick of inner cities, and I only have to work in psychiatric hospitals, which was very heavy. And I also think some of that can be a trauma response, right? Because you have your own trauma. I mean, definitely for me, it was traumatic to move here by myself without, again, documentation, money, language. So I just like threw myself in the middle of the ocean, and I said to myself, go ahead and swim. But I think that even if it was only being a woman, men tend to be more assertive, not to be so binary right now, but my experience has been that gender plays a role as well in all the intersectionalities, right? I don't consider myself white, but I also don't consider myself Black. So I can't identify with someone that's Black and how they view having a career like this. But for me, that played a huge role. My own intersectionalities, my self-doubt, maybe that's all I can reach. Who am I have friends that are Americans or that have money, and here I am trying to make something different.
Yeah.
And I definitely felt that at my last job, because they knew that I had a private practice. Certain I don't mean to badmouth therapists. I first had my own judgment towards myself before, and then once I made the leap of faith with both of you, I felt a little bit judged by others and myself. Like, am I, a good therapist, or am I someone that can help, but I'm pushing back these individuals that don't have the means of the insurance? And it's not push back, even now the language, it's more like refer them out. I wasn't telling them like, no, I cannot see you because I don't want to. It was more like, this is what works for me, but if it doesn't work for you, here you go.
Yeah. So with that and all of these different parts of you at play, what did it take for you to leave the nonprofit that you worked at?
Oh, this is going to sound ridiculous, because it wasn't like I felt overly confident and I left. I just started valuing my time and my time with myself and time with my kids. And what really happened was that my brother got deported in the midst of, era where a lot of immigrants could not stay here. And that opened the door for me to do a lot of in the midst of all these changes. And that soul searching was more of a self-compassion piece where I had never really felt before, where I could say to myself that I'm sorry you're going through this. And I know it sounds like cliche, but I got the most awakening part of my life was then through that pain. And I realized that, I'm getting myself sick by working all these hours. And here we are as therapists, know that attachment is so important for our children, and self-care is so important for us, and yet we don't do it. And so I had an epiphany, and I said to myself, this is it. I cannot, and I say it's ridiculous because in the midst of all this, I was also not feeling well. I was having some health issues. That I figured, I should just take care of myself. What am I doing here instead of pedaling?
Yeah.
So it took that much for me to kind of like.
Yeah. And that makes sense too, when you're coming here and there's this kind of fighting just to survive and fighting to get what you need. And then being in a situation where your body had to speak up, life was speaking up, children are speaking up, relationships are speaking up to compel you to finally to look within. Once you let go of the nonprofit, what happened in your practice?
Well, that's where my life started looking up. I obviously had more time. I could invest into the business. I also didn't do all the modules, which I would highly, highly suggest for everyone to do them all, because I had no time. It was kind of like spotty the way I was doing private practice. And I had more time to grow as a clinician. I was in a much more peaceful place, and that's when clients were flowing, which is I have only like my organic data that when you're anxious as a therapist, it seems like it's a dry spell.
Yes.
But by now I know it has been almost 8 years. So by now I know that I have to take care of me. And so that's when I noticed clients flowing, word of mouth, things were very easy to like attend to, because I'm not working 40 hours and I'm still making more, by the way, at that time. And so it felt like a fresh of that breath here, because I'd never experienced working less, making more, and also like slowing down, which has always been my desire. Because back
Mm-hmm.
home, my culture is a little bit more laid back, like a lot of other cultures, especially in Europe. You tend to enjoy life a little bit more, and work doesn't is not priority. And so I also felt more connected with my background, what I was raised with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, how did you decide to go into group practice?
Well, it wasn't making any sense to refer clients out. I have a circle of friends that I love and I know that they do good work, but it got to a point, and obviously this is a good problem to have, but it got to a point that I was referring too many people out and I
Mm,
couldn't take anymore. I also stood by, I did not want to see more than 20 clients. That were felt that number felt like full time for me.
mm-hmm.
And so I started looking for clinicians that were interested. And I started with one.
Mm-hmm.
Then I hired the second clinician.
Yeah.
Then, you know, now I have four clinicians.
Mm-hmm. And how did you fit a nonprofit in here?
It's interesting because every year, so because my life changed so much after I dropped the nonprofit job, I
Mm-hmm.
decided I want to go, and it changed financially and time, right? So I decided
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to go to my country for the first time in many years on vacation. I mean, I'd go there back and forth, but um, having children, not having money, it's really tough because only a ticket is $2,000 to go there. So, but your teaching was, when are you scheduling time for you? And so I decided that 1 month during summer, I want to spend time with my family. And I saw some clients when I was there, which I would not suggest, but it decreased some of my anxiety
Anxiety.
in the
Mm-hmm.
at the time. And I decreased the caseload tremendously, but I saw some. And so I went there, and of course, I feel really connected. I have a child, two children by that time, because that's when I opened my when I went there, and so I decided to like look for like how can I make an impact back in my country, and who can I help. And it happened to be that my hotel room was next to an orphanage center,
Mm-hmm.
and the people that worked at the hotel, they said you cannot just walk in, they will not let you in because they're dealing with children, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
like they have to know who you are. And of course I'm like this, I've been in US for 18 years at the time. And so almost like American mentality because I've been here for so long. But I decided to just go and check if the director was open to talking about helping. And surprisingly, the director knew my best friend that lives there and is pretty accomplished. And so she trusted me just by like asking around who I was, and then asked me for like my diploma and everything, and said, now you can come in, and what is your goal? What do you want why do you want to do this? And skeptical, right? I was like, because I just want to give back, and I have children of my own, and it breaks my heart to see these kids without their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting part about this orphanage was that parents were alive. Only some parents, abandoned their children, but some parents could not afford raising
Mm-hmm.
them. So they didn't have food or shelter. So they would leave them there to like, for a better life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it started. I started getting connected with these kids. Some one of the kids was named my son's name, Alexander. Another one was my name, Sonila, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to bring them home.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting. interesting because that's how I started it. And then every year we'd go and just provide everything that they needed. So when we travel, we pack for a family of 4 with 1 luggage, which I'm really proud of. And then the other 3 luggages go for the orphanage center or people that need something, either medication or iPads or blankets. Like one time we dropped off security camera and one of those, like, it's not walkie talkie, but my kids are 5 now. The youngest is 5. So what is the one that you put in the room to see the babies?
Like a monitor.
If they're like monitor, yeah. So it's clearly I'm still learning the language because
it's okay.
But yeah, I brought some monitors for the babies because these women that would help. I've done trainings with them. They would just like sleep in the same room because they didn't have a monitor to see if the baby was up or not. And so I brought like high chairs, but the closed ones, that you can put on chairs there.
Yes.
They didn't have any of that. So kids were like running around. And of course, these kids have attachment issues. So they're going to be a little bit more behaviorally acting out, rightfully so. I mean, it's expected. But this is how we started it. And then, I find out that whatever money I was spending there would not be counted for gift or like donations, because it was like you're just going internationally and you're not giving it to, actually international help doesn't count for your taxes. So I was like, well, this doesn't make sense because I'm working hard for this, I'm helping, but I'm also getting 35% charge for IRS
on top, yes,
for this money on top of that.
Yes.
And so what I decided to do is hire a few people to help me with applying for a nonprofit here in Chicago, because our nonprofit is based here, and it's called careforalbania.org. Albania is my country. And so within 3 months, luckily, which is unheard of to get, the nonprofit up and running quickly, we got approved. So now we are a 501c3. There are other people that have helped, other Albanians that have helped a little bit. I am in the stages of making it bigger than just our practice helping. So only our private practice has been helping so far. The biggest money and donations and everything that we do. And so now I'm in the process of expanding and having other people
sources
that donate.
Yes.
Other sources. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's looking at how we look at all the different ways we can give back. And what I appreciate about this is it's your story, your passion. Again, that intersection of being in the US and being an immigrant and still having your heart there with your family and the people you grew up with, and finding a way to have your practice give back and creating this nonprofit model. It is another way that we can make an impact in the world that I think many of us don't consider, that there's so much more beyond sliding scale, that you can make impact in very different ways. And it's a beautiful testament of how when you made space for honoring yourself, this is another way of honoring who you are and your story, but it's also it's reflected in your business, so your business can flourish and facilitate that for you. And it can be less forced and more with it feels like a natural flow from you of who you are.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's very healing for me to help and to help people and kids that are kind of like what I was. I mean, I was a kid, 19 years old, being raised in a very, like, I mean, you don't, 19 there, you still live with your parents, at the time at least. So I was just like, I felt like I was a kid. So it is honoring my story, honoring, people that are suffering. combining it with like our my field. And also I think that it's what I view a big lesson here is that my parents always gave, even as immigrants, they would help back, but they didn't help themselves.
Mm,
And I broke the cycle of helping others but yourself, even though it doesn't come out like that. But they always talked about, respect others, get up if there is an older person, to sit
yeah.
down or
Hmm.
be nice to others and help. And so, but never really said help yourself, because it
Yeah.
almost sounds selfish and it sounds like it's a bad thing. I would have never had what I have now if I
Right.
didn't help myself first and my own family
Right.
with
Yeah.
time and money. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, when I talk, so our group is we have a really close group in our private practice. And when we talk about money, I usually say that money goes through us,
Yes.
not gets stuck in us, because once that happens, then you're going to have anxiety, and you're not going to know this with data, obvious data, but it's a subtle way of showing you, like, you're putting the blocks into your life here, financially, emotionally, psychologically, physically, all of that.
Hmm. Yeah. I love that. And yeah, it's and you honoring who you are and what you needed allowed for you to grow this business that could support and give back in this way. And I know that that nonprofit is now going to grow again, with the next iteration as you add in more donors and grants and things like that. But even as it is today, what a beautiful birth from taking care of you. So
Yeah.
I want to ask, for those who are listening who do have a heart to give back. Um, I think you've already mentioned this about taking care of yourself, but is there anything else you want to add in terms of your lesson from starting from scratch and, working multiple jobs, leaving that, and to build a group practice and a nonprofit? What is one of the encouraging things that you can give to someone listening today who's thinking, I would love to have that, but I don't know if I can?
Well, I was that person for all those years. And I think that, being aware of your own mortality is really important. I think when we pause and we think that we're not going to have a life forever,
Mhm.
making an impact makes it a little bit more um, pushy, right? More stressful, because you're like, oh my gosh, but it doesn't have to be like that. For me, knowing that, hey, wait a minute, I've been working in this field in a nonprofit job for all these years, but I don't seem to be fulfilled. Moving on. And again, it's a process, right? You have to deconstruct everything that you've learned. That's why I mentioned my parents giving, but that doesn't mean that they gave me the lesson of give to yourself. So I think that I would encourage anyone to first and foremost pause and check in with themselves where they are, because if you go day in and day out busy, the biggest mistake that we make is that we don't really listen to like the core values that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I was that person for 15, 16 years, where it's extremely busy, always busy with work and family and helping others. And when I paused, it really helped that now I can help at this large level with what I want, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever people I want, that's where my heart is. So, uh, not be more transparent versus a busy bee and abstract that I have to work hard and I just need to put my head down and do it. And again, this comes back to the intersectionalities as well.
Yes.
How you think of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
A white straight man will have a lot more confidence. Not everybody, but in general, they'll have a lot more confidence to go and get it or ask for a raise and or do something that
Right. There's less
yeah.
consideration. Like the oppression and the risk is different for each person. And so Yeah.
It is very different. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but when I left my nonprofit job, I was the sole provider, financial provider, because my husband was staying home, was a stay-at-home dad.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't afford $2,000 daycare, nor did I want to, because we both felt like this would be a good, choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to think about all the pieces, right? Of like, am I making the best choice? But if you don't make that leap of faith, if you don't try, it doesn't happen. And I know that it's easier said than done. That's why I've shared my story, because it's not like my story has been rosy and I'm like not aware of what poverty means. I mean, I remember, and I say this very proudly, by the way, but when I moved here, I remember cleaning houses. And then, of course, I built myself up and going to school. And then when I was with my husband and my child, when I stopped um, the nonprofit job, we didn't have a lot of money. We literally were making it by having a link card,
Mm-hmm.
a support card from Chicago, to survive, to have food. And so I know what being dirt poor means. And I know someone can say, well, I have to do this and I have to do that. The only reason I am where I am is because I had to pause and be compassionate towards myself,
Mm-hmm.
even from a sitting down perspective, working in an agency where I had to see 8 clients a day, which is quite a lot. I don't even know how I did that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do what we have to do sometimes, I think. And because we think that is, well, the system tells us that's what's good or normal. And so we adhere to it. Sonila, thank you so much for sharing your story. I feel so honored to know you. And I hope that this is inspiring to people for them to think through of how they're taking care of themselves, honoring what they need. Yes, there is risk taking, but aligning to who you are and your values can pay off, and that there are many ways that a practice can build into something beautiful that supports you and supports others. So I appreciate you.
Of course, I appreciate you. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me and my family and my group practice. And you're part of this orphanage center.
I love it. All right. If you love this episode, please share it. And I hope that you were inspired, that you take action on your own practice, that maybe you are more willing to take a little bit more of a risk or to reflect on who you are and what you need. So we'll see you next time.